Hi, good morning. It's Jesse, and today I want to talk to you about Jesus and the reason he stayed hidden. So in all of the Gospels, we find stories of miracles where Jesus had hid people, right? Or I'm sorry, where he had healed people, and then he had said to them, don't tell anybody. He wanted to remain hidden. And some scholars will say that he did this in reverse psychology, because when you tell someone don't tell them, they go and tell everybody. But the thing is that Jesus wasn't manipulative. Manipulation is a tool of the devil, and Jesus had overcome the devil. He didn't use the devil's tools in his life. So that reason should have been squashed straight out the gates, you know? We find that he hid in the stories of Mark 8, where, Peter declared, Jesus asked him, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter declared that you're the Messiah. And Jesus warned him not to tell anybody about him. And we find that he hid in Mark 1 when Jesus healed a man with leprosy, After he healed him, he was like, "You can make me clean if you want." And Jesus said, "I am willing." And then he said, "Be clean." And immediately the man was healed. But Jesus said, "Don't tell anyone." And in all three Gospels, Mark, Matthew, and Luke, he said the same thing in all three. He healed the man and told him, "Don't tell anyone I did it, but go show yourself to the priest, show the glory of God working in your life, you know. But the man went around and he kind of told everyone. In Mark 3, we find another story, where the crowds began to follow Jesus because the word of all the miracles that he was working had gotten around, And Jesus, he healed many that were pushing forward, but he had a boat that he wanted to jump out onto because there were too many people there, too many people drawing up him. And so he gave them strict orders, don't tell others about him. He didn't want to be followed. In Mark 5, we find with Jairus' daughter, after he raised her from the dead, he still gave the order, don't tell anyone about him. In Mark 7, when Jesus healed a deaf and mute man, and even then he said, don't tell anyone about me. In the Transfiguration, when it was just Peter, James, and John, when Jesus went to meet with Moses and Elijah, and Peter, James, and John got to witness this, even still, Jesus said, don't tell anyone about what they had saw. And the reason for this wasn't because he was afraid so much. It's that God has rules. We have this anointing on us, and it's kind of like it tells us what to do. We don't drive it so much as we carry it, and it drives us, it tells us what to do. The Lord directs our path, as David would say. He orders our steps, and so to stand up pridefully and say, this is me, that wasn't something Jesus would do, and not only that, but if you knew Jewish prophecies, their messianic prophecies, what they believe, the things that will happen when the Messiah comes, for one thing, all systems will crash, the economic systems, the government systems, all these systems around the world, they're going to crash, and this is part of the reason why they don't believe in Jesus, right? But knowing this prophecy, you have to know that when Jesus was around, his very presence was a challenge to their authority. And it tells us right in Proverbs 9, not to correct people. Don't correct. Whoever corrects a mocker invites insults. Whoever rebukes the wicked incurs abuse. Do not rebuke mockers, or they will hate you. Rebuke the wise, and they will love you. Instruct the wise, and they'll be wiser still. Teach the righteous, and they will add to their learning. So it kind of prescribes to us what we are to do. We're not supposed to go out and challenge people. If we challenge those in authority, we're not just challenging them on their doctrine. We're not just challenging them on their positions on policy. We're not challenging them on their abuse of people, but we're challenging their position as ruler and king, and to be a peasant, I would say. Jesus wasn't a peasant, but you understand that he was not a king as he walked amongst the living until he made his triumphal entry in Jerusalem. But he did not stand as a king. He had authority in the spirit, but he didn't flex his authority in the flesh. And so for him to challenge the seat of a ruler, do you even know what that would do? He would be immediately hung and crucified. He would be attacked. They have great armies. Rulers and kings, even lesser people, have great armies around them that protect them, that give them their power, And for anyone who challenges their power, they not only face that person, but everyone who serves them would be against them. And what God says is that we do these things little by little. He teaches us little by little so that the beasts of the field don't overcome us, so that the beasts don't overtake us. So Jesus was very adamant about not telling people about who he was, because he knew his position and his mission. Okay, his mission was to squash all power and authority in the world, but he knew that he wasn't going to do it by his flesh alone, because his flesh is not strong enough. His flesh has weakness. He was able to be killed on the cross, but his spirit, on the other hand, he said that he did the things he did because the Spirit of God was upon him. The Spirit of God was driving him, making him God to us, right? So you have to understand that they can crush the flesh, but not the spirit. And things in the spirit manifest before they do in the flesh, which is why people recognized him where he went, why the demons called out to him, Son of David, have mercy on us, But you have to understand that to challenge these things in the flesh would be a suicide mission, There's, how do I explain? Okay, so the power that the anointed one holds is actually in their bones. And we can know this if we look through. We know that people take power from bones, okay? The story of Elisha, when he was buried in the grave, someone had died around him, and they threw his bones into the grave with Elisha's, and immediately, as soon as that dead man touched Elisha's bones, he came back to life instantly. That shows you that the power of the anointing was not really in the flesh so much, but it still lives on in the bones, because when the Spirit of God is on you, when he cut covenant with you, he enters into you so that the two become one. And this is where we find that Jesus is God here, right? Because the two become one, and the anointing stays in the bones. And this is real important to know, okay? Elijah's anointing that kept in his bones even when he was dead and past the point where the anointing could serve him, the anointing could still serve the people in the world, and it brought this man to life, the power of the bones. This isn't the first time that the power of the bones was displayed. We actually find it much earlier, like when Joseph died and he gave directions for when the Israelites came out of Egypt, they were to take his bones with them, because Joseph knew that his bones were going to hold the power of God, and that's part of the reason why Egypt was so prosperous, and part of the reason why the Jewish people were so oppressed, because they didn't have their ancestors with them. They couldn't, how do I say? The bones belonged in their land, Okay, it belonged in their land to serve to protect their land. Because the bones were in enemy territory, the bones were serving the enemy. And the enemy knows that they could use the bones to service them because they've been doing it for a long time. But when Moses brought Joseph's bones out of Egypt, that Red Sea parted for them to walk through, and part of what parted that gave them the power to part the Red Sea, it wasn't just the Spirit of God, yes, the Spirit of God, but the Spirit of God was with them because they were carrying Joseph's bones. It wasn't just Moses didn't hold covenant. Yeah, he carried an ark of the covenant, but he didn't hold covenant with God. Yeah, he was a mighty prophet, but he didn't hold covenant with God. And the reason why I know this is because his bones remained here. Joseph's bones, they were to serve the land. That's why Jesus left his bones that's why God left his bones in the earth, because his bones were meant to serve the people. But God had saw how the people had used the bones, and from there he stopped leaving bones. Like when Elijah was up, he took Elijah up in a whirlwind. Enoch, he took Enoch up in a whirlwind. Jesus, he took Jesus up in a whirlwind. We can know who God was with by the fact that God didn't leave their bones here. Now, the lesser people who were meant to, and I don't mean lesser by like bad people. I mean, they weren't ranked as high as Jesus, Elijah, or Enoch. Their bones were left here. But the anointing that was on Enoch, Jesus, and Elijah, that anointing had the power to create life and destroy life. Jesus, he molded things from clay, and he, helped people to see it and regrew eyes and whatnot. So we know that he had the power to create life in him. And that's part of why God takes that out, because man is not meant to have that power. When God puts that power in the earth, it's for him to use. It's for him to bring about change in the world. And that's why he doesn't leave it here, because us foolish people, if we look at Micah 3, Micah 3, it says, "Then I said to you, listen, you leaders of Jacob, you rulers of Israel, should you not embrace justice, you who hate good and love evil, who tear the skin from my people and the flesh from their bones, who eat my people's flesh, strip off their skin and break their bones in pieces, who chop them up like meat for the pan, like flesh for the pot." This is not like an allegory here. This is not a symbolic thing that God is proclaiming in this word. This is a real thing that they do. See, they've learned the power of the bones in Joseph. And so they started digging up bones and using them. And we find that when the judges came through Israel, one of the first things that they did was they broke the bones. They destroyed the altar and they burnt the bones up. We find this, let's see. Okay, so in 2 Kings 23:13-15, Josiah smashed the sacred stones and cut down the Asherah poles and covered the site with human bones. In 2 Kings 23:19, Josiah slaughtered all the priests of those high places on the altars and burned the human bones on them. They worship lesser gods, right? They created these idols, but they put the anointed bones of God around the idols, which gave them power. And so people could see the power manifested. People would get healed by walking up to these bones, but it was not the lesser God. It was the anointing of God put in the bones to serve the people in the world that the people had corrupted and put around these idols, and gave the power of God to a false thing. You understand what I'm saying? I'm running out of time because I got a 15-minute time limit, but give me a minute and I'm going to continue.